Hi, curious minds and headline hunters. Welcome to another episode of Talk, Listen, and Discuss. I'm going to be rounding out my Amy Bradley series with this video today. First of all, I want to thank all of you who have been very respectful with your discussions, whether you agree with me or not. Your comments have been very refreshing and interesting, and I really appreciate the time you take to write these comments. But not all comments are created equal, and there are some that are still out there, not just on my YouTube channel, but on others, where they just come across as frenzied and emotional. I am trying not to report that way. The research I do, I go in there making sure I'm learning new things that are not necessarily a part of the case, meaning facts, but are part of mindsets, of actions, of behaviors, studies, whatever is out there that can help me when I start looking into what we know about the case, not just this case, any case. So when it comes to this case of Amy Bradley, everything I present is me going that one step further. Okay, well, this is what I'm seeing, but does it align with what is known to occur when things like this happen? And what kind of facts and studies do we have out there to support it? These are the kinds of things that I like to do because if not, then I'll go off of emotion only. And then I would be one of those people that's saying, oh, yeah, it must have been yellow. He was flirting with her. So it must have been him because how creepy is that to be flirting with somebody when you're there to work or whatever people are saying. For whatever reason, people are just focused on the band member who was flirting with passenger. And I want to respect that there's reasons that they think it could be him, but just being on 4 cruises myself, I always thought it was normal for the bartenders, the wait staff, the band members to flirt with the people. And I just don't see that as being out of the ordinary myself. So maybe my experience is giving me a little bit of bias here. And maybe if I had never been on a cruise and never experienced any of that, maybe I would think that he was creepy and he must be involved. But he simply just doesn't come across as somebody that could be part of a very complex and organized criminal activity like trafficking is. So moving on the Amy Bradley is missing.com site, I'm reading to you, and I wish I could show you my screen. However, I am having technical difficulties with my video right now, so this will be totally audio. I will have some frames for you to see. I'm on the amybradleyismissing.com site, and I'm under the category of Rhapsody of the Seas. And if you just stop and look at certain things, you'll miss a lot of good information. So if you go to the amybradleyismissing.com site, I highly recommend that you scroll and see everything because there's information that's not necessarily at the top. You'll have to find it as you scroll. And the one thing I'd always been upset about, and maybe upset's not the word, when we're doing this, we understand the family is having heartbreak and tragedy. We understand that the family is going through things emotionally and actually daily that we'll never be able to comprehend because we're not going through that. So when I say I'm frustrated or it gets me, I'm coming as a person who is researching. That's it. I'm never going to say that I'm frustrated and that frustration level is in any way, shape, or form similar to the Bradleys or more on level with the Bradleys. I'm saying just as somebody who's doing research, who's very interested in a case that has been put out there very publicly for us to have an interest in, that is me being human and letting you know that there's things out there that I wish we could know, just like I'm sure the family wants to know as well, at a different, more intense, deeper emotion. But for me, the simple question that has been asked that I've never seen anybody answer was what happened to that camera? If one of the scenarios was that Amy Bradley was meeting up with Yellow or somebody to go take pictures, so I always wondered, well, if they believed that she could have left the room to go take pictures, but if the camera was still in her room, why isn't anything said? For example, oh, we were suspicious because she left the room, but she didn't take her camera. So we were kind of, wondering if she didn't go to take photos, then what was she going to do? Or, yeah, we have a high suspicion that she did go take photos because she had her camera with her. These kinds of things. So I did actually find something on the amybradleysmissing.com site, which I glossed over and happened to go back over and reread things. And I'm glad I did because I would have missed this had I not. So one of the replies of Rhapsody of the Sea on April 20th, 2018, the administrator posted, "This is the upper deck of Rhapsody of the Seas." And again, I'm going to put this image on my video for you to see. It is the picture of Rhapsody of the Sea. You can see the whole vessel from an aerial view where you can see just how the layout is, so we can mentally picture what Amy Bradley being on the top of that ship would look like. In this comment here by the administrator that is accompanying this photo, it reads, "This is the upper deck of Rhapsody of the Seas. Witnesses testified for a federal grand jury in Richmond, Virginia, that Amy was seen here with Alistair Douglas minutes before she disappeared." I think a lot of us on here know who Alistair Douglas is referred to in the Netflix documentary and in other articles and places as Yellow, but just in case, I'm going to say Alistair Douglas is Yellow. Amy had her camera with her, and it is believed she went to the upper deck for photographs of the Willemstad Canal. She was not wearing shoes and she did not run through a parking lot looking for a phone. So, again, let me reread that to you. The comment reads, "This is the upper deck of Rhapsody of the Seas. Witnesses testified for a federal grand jury in Richmond, Virginia, that Amy was seen here with Alistair Douglas minutes before she disappeared. Amy had her camera with her, and it is believed she went to the upper deck for photographs of the Willemstad Canal. She was not wearing shoes and she did not run through a parking lot looking for a phone." Okay, so moving on from the amybradleyismissing.com site, I wanted to take you back to the styleweekly.com article. In one of the videos, I briefly visited the part one. That's where we learned about the San Juan, Puerto Rico eyewitness account that had never been out there. And again, remember, this is coming from 1999, so just a year after Amy Bradley went missing. Now, I wanted to share some things from part two and three, and I'll quickly read the article to you and give you some commentary as I go through it. So, part two starts with, "Everyone else was pale and white after a winter spent under sweaters and heavy coats, but not Amy. After 3 weeks of indoor tanning, she was a fashionable brown, ready for the Caribbean sun. On Friday, March 20th, 1998, Amy and her mother were having dinner at her Aunt Mary's house. Mary Christensen and Iva oohed and awed over Amy's crisp tan lines as Amy laughed, showing off. Amy had just darkened her hair from a bleach blonde and gotten her fingernails done in anticipation of the Caribbean trip." Again, I'm going to stop here because some of the comments I've been getting is that, of course, she fit the profile for being trafficked because she was a white woman with blue eyes, although her eyes were really green, and had blonde hair. But at the time of the cruise, Amy Bradley had short brown hair. She did not have long hair. She did not have long blonde hair. She did not have blonde hair at all. And I just wanted to point that out. Her father, an insurance agent, was one of about 35 agents around the nation who won an all-expense-paid family cruise from Illinois Mutual Life for selling $145,000 in paid premiums. Most agents just took their spouses, but Ron and Iva wanted to bring Amy and Brad. So they bought plane tickets for them and paid $2,000 for their portion of the cruise. Amy excitedly told her Aunt Mary about the trip, which would start in San Juan and take them to the islands of Aruba, Curacao, St. Martin, and St. Thomas before returning to Puerto Rico. They also talked about Amy's new job. On the Monday after Amy was to get back from the cruise, she was to start working as a marketing and office assistant for Mary and her husband Mike, who owned a software company. Amy had cut her hours at Ruth Chris Steakhouse, where she worked full time, so she could take the job. Long term, Amy was thinking about getting a master's in sports psychology or opening a sports bar. A couple months earlier, Amy had moved into her first new apartment in the Timbers, a complex off of Robius Road in Chesterfield. Though she moved out of her parents' home, Amy was never far from them. She and her mother went grocery shopping together every week. They decorated Amy's apartment together. Her father helped her reupholster the chairs in the old dinette set her parents gave her. She and her mother loved to call each other up on the phone when something funny was on television, like Mystery Science Theater 3000 or Cow and Chicken. Amy was especially excited about the cruise because her brother Brad was going home from George Mason University. Tall and athletic like his sister, and just 2.5 years younger, Brad was also one of her best buddies. And you definitely get that vibe from them. You could tell that those two were, particularly close. Although in an interview I just saw that is a recent interview, in fact, I don't even think it's a week old. If I find that interview, I'll link it in the description as I will the other resources I'm using today for this video. He said that they really didn't talk about her relationships. The two would go out with friends or just hang out together, hitting Chesterfield bars, singing karaoke, throwing darts, shooting pool, or bowling. About 7 a.m. Saturday, March 21st, Amy and Brad boarded a plane at Richmond International Airport. Their parents left an hour ahead on another flight. Amy and Brad were both nervous about flying, but did crosswords and listened to Amy's portable CD players to distract themselves. By around 2 p.m., they reached the rambling ship terminal at San Juan and found their parents. Amy bought postcards at one of the tourist shops and sent them to friends. Hey girl, she wrote, it's gorgeous here. We leave for Aruba tomorrow. I'll be home Saturday at 10. She told another friend she was taking pictures and would show them to her on Easter. She bought 15 rolls of film and was hoping to take some pictures of Brad to enter in a modeling contest. So, what I really like about this article is we get some of the information that we haven't gotten on recent interviews or on any other publications that I have come across, at least. 11 stories high, the gleaming white, 915-foot long, 106-foot wide Rhapsody of the Seas was an impressive sight. Docked at San Juan, less than a year old, the ship weighed 75,000 tons and carried a crew of 765 with room for 2,435 guests. Amy looked up in amazement and told Brad she was having the best time of her life already. Then she saw the gangplank, 3 feet wide and 60 feet off the ground. Afraid of heights, Amy scrambled up quickly, staying as close to the center as she could. I mentioned this because I have had some replies in my feed on they didn't know she was scared of heights, but a lot of the things I've read and come across do mention that she was afraid of heights. Saturday went by quickly with dinner, drinks, and swimming at the pool. Pretty, tanned, muscular, slender, tall, 5'7" and 115 pounds, and tattooed, Amy attracted a lot of attention on board the ship. She had been collecting tattoos since her senior year in high school when she got a tattoo on her left shoulder of baby Taz spinning a basketball to commemorate winning her basketball scholarship to Longwood. A primitive sun with the Chinese symbol for heaven on her lower back, a Chinese symbol for faith on her right ankle, and a gecko lizard wrapped around her navel followed. Brad has a similar Chinese tattoo on one of his arms. Sunday, March 22nd, the ship was at sea all day. Amy and Iva attended an art auction and bought a modernist serigraph of a blonde woman sitting in a chair to hang on the wall of Amy's apartment. It's still rolled in its brown cardboard tube at the Bradleys. According at the time of this publication, 1999, it was still rolled up. I wonder if it's still rolled up now. By Monday, the ship docked at Aruba. Ron, Iva, Amy, and Brad disembarked. Amy did a little shopping, buying trinkets for friends. Back home, she wanted to buy a nice piece of jewelry for her best friend, but her mother told her to wait until they got to St. Thomas where they could get a better buy. During the island tour, the family rented a Jeep for the day to explore Aruba on their own. They ended up lost on dirty off roads in a windy, hot desert. Once back in civilization, the Bradleys had lunch at a Taco Bell and then drove to Palm Beach, where Iva, Ron, and Brad swam in the ocean, calling to Amy, laughing, "Come on in, the water's freezing." Amy clung to her dad's back in the water for a while, then got out. A certified lifeguard, she swam in her neighborhood association from the time she was 5 until she was 18. She was an assistant to the swim team coach at Longwood and coached her aunt's neighborhood association, but she wasn't crazy about swimming in the ocean. Mainly, she was afraid of what else might be swimming in it. Now, this is also interesting to point out because one of the arguments on why Amy would not have deliberately gotten close to the rail or jumped into the ocean is that she was deathly afraid of it. On board the ship, her parents and brothers say she wouldn't get close to the railing, even though the railings were chest high for her. It made her knees weak. Returning to the ship, the family took showers and dressed for a formal dinner. Amy wore a tight open back black jumpsuit with spaghetti straps. They waited in line to have their picture taken by the ship's photographer and chatted with other passengers. Meanwhile, Amy was attracting notice from passengers and crew. Now, we've heard, not only here but in other places, that there was over 2,300 passengers on the ship. And that Amy attracted notice from them is something that I've always found interesting because this is the first and only time I've really seen it written this way. But if there were other passengers on that ship, how many were looked into for criminal activity, for criminal records, things like that? Because there are a lot of other eyes that could have been on her. There could have been a lot of other eyes that had not only been on her, but were deliberately following her and focusing on her. This is why I don't like that they pinpointed the yellow right off the bat and made him the primary focus because there were so many other people that could have been lurking in the background that may have had nefarious ideas and been the culprits. And because so much time was spent in the wrong direction, they overlooked them. After dinner, Ron and Iva were having drinks with business associates when a waiter approached them. Again, how deeply were the business associates looked into? Okay, moving on. They recognized him as a man who had been lavishing an unusual amount of attention on Amy since the ship left the dock. The man asked if Amy wanted to come to a bar in Aruba that night with him and some other crew members. This would be the gentleman that I was reading about earlier in the amybradleyismissing.com website under the topic Rhapsody of the Seas, where they were looking into Eduardo Cabrita, the Portuguese waiter. But later gave Amy the message, but she wasn't interested. So I guess the man told Iva that he wanted to take Amy to the bar with his friends, and she relayed the message to Amy, and Amy was like, no, no way. Meanwhile, Amy and Brad had changed into casual clothes and gone to the ship's casino, starting with $10 in quarters each. They played the slot machines and each won about $140. Ron and Iva found Amy and Brad again on the pool deck, each carting a bucket of quarters. The four of them sat down on the deck, laughing and dumping the quarters out of the buckets like children building a sandcastle. Amy and Brad, ever competitive, counted to see who had the most quarters. Late that night, they took in a limbo party, dancing to the steel drum music of the ship's calypso band, Blue Orchid. Amy struck up a conversation with the band's bassist, a pudgy bald grenadine nicknamed Yellow for short for high yellow, Caribbean slang for light black skin. It was typical Amy. Brad won the limbo contest that night, and when he was crowned, Amy ran up to him, jumped, and wrapped her legs around him. He took the crown off and put it on her head, and they both laughed. Amy and Brad still had hours of partying ahead, but it had been a long day for their parents. Ron and Iva kissed them goodnight and headed to the room. I love you. I'll see you in a little while, Iva told Amy. It was to be the last thing she said to her daughter. I wanted to reintroduce the fact that the whole family had been drinking. It's not really mentioned here, but in other interviews, videos, articles, statements, the family had been drinking that entire day and night. Wanting to make sure everything was okay, Ron sat up and told Iva he was going to check on Brad. He went to the ship disco, the Viking Lounge, and found Brad dancing with a handful of young women. Now, I don't remember seeing this in the documentary, the Netflix documentary. It may have been there and I just missed it. I did recently rewatch some of the documentary, but not all of it. So it may have been in there and I just missed it, but I haven't seen it anywhere where Ron went to go check on the kids. So I found this part interesting. Amy was on the second floor of the disco talking with band members and the club DJ. Satisfied, Ron went back to bed. About 3:45 a.m., Brad and Amy returned to the room. They went out onto the balcony to smoke, but Ron woke up because they had left on the bathroom light. He told Amy to turn it off, and the last thing he remembered before going to sleep was the glow of her Marlboro light as she walked past. Again, something I haven't read or seen anywhere else. Amy and Brad smoked for a while, watching the waves and laughing about the limbo contest. I'm not going to say that they couldn't really see the waves. I think that you can see the waves even that time of night with your patio light, but I'm not sure. But I found it interesting that they mentioned that they were watching the waves here. Again, something else I haven't seen or heard of anywhere else. And laughing about the limbo contest. They also talked about the next day in Curacao, and Amy asked Brad if he had ever been on a jet ski. This was the first time I've seen it in print, but not the first time I've heard about it because in an interview, I think it was the same one I was telling you about earlier that happened within the week, is that he did mention that they were considering going on jet skis, which I found very interesting. If Amy was scared of the ocean, that she would even consider going on a jet ski, knowing that you could possibly fall into the ocean from a jet ski crash or stalling or something like that, as happens often. And so I thought that her being afraid of heights and going bungee jumping, and now her being afraid of the ocean, but yet considering jet skiing, I found that all very, I guess, interesting is the word because I really don't know what to make of it. Finally, Brad opened the patio door and rolled into the sofa bed he was sharing with Amy during the trip. Now, he has mentioned recently that they did share sofa bed, but there were some older interviews and even an older podcast I heard earlier this morning where not him, sorry, not Brad, but the people that are telling this story are mentioning twin beds, and that simply wasn't the case here. They were on a sofa bed with Amy during the trip. She stayed behind on the balcony. At about 5:30 a.m., Ron awoke and saw Amy's leg on the lounge chair on the balcony. Now, I will tell you this. Now, I don't know how Ron knows he woke up at 5:30 or somewhere around there and saw Amy. I don't really know that. But I will say that he's been very consistent on that timeline up from then up until now. Thinking she had fallen asleep, he went back to sleep. At 6 a.m., Ron woke up again. Amy wasn't in the room or the balcony. Her cigarettes and lighter were gone. She had taken off the yellow polo shirt she had been wearing and picked up a pair of jeans. Again, something I hadn't heard anywhere or seen anywhere is that she picked up a pair of jeans. Ron looked for a note Amy's had before leaving anywhere, but there was none. Taking care not to wake Iva or Brad, he put on his shorts and went up to the pool deck a level above to look for her. The ship was docked at Curacao, having sailed into the island's canal less than 1 hour earlier. She wasn't on the pool deck. Ron looked other places with no luck. The more he walked and looked, the more uneasy he became. On the way back to the room, he saw the ship's chief security officer standing at the elevator. Ron asked for help, and the officer nodded noncommittally, staying where he was. Nearly an hour had passed. Now, in my previous video, where I also mentioned the bungee jumping, there also was the mention of the chief security officer and how Brad Bradley seemed to think that the chief security officer, it was suspicious that he happened to be outside their room, and that his dad said that he saw them right outside the room or something like that. And he thought that that was suspicious in hindsight. But here in this article, where it seems like they sat down with the family a little, maybe a little over, I think it's over a year since she disappeared. Here in this article, it says that on his way to the room, standing at the elevator, the chief security officer was there. So I don't know if that means the elevator that he was going to go to the room, or once he got up to his level and walked out of the elevator, the chief security officer was there. I also found that whole description pretty interesting. Ron woke Iva and Brad. I've known him since I was 13. I've known him 32 years, and I've never seen him look like he looked. I didn't have any idea what was wrong, Iva recalls. He said, I can't find Amy. Ron and Iva immediately went to the purser's desk and told them they couldn't find Amy and suspected foul play. They asked for help finding her. The ship employees told her it was too early, that an announcement would disturb the other guests. They asked to see a supervisor who eventually agreed to make an announcement over the ship's loudspeaker. While the Bradleys waited, a ship employee announced the gangplank would be going down so passengers could disembark to Curacao. Iva begged them to leave it up so that in case someone had kidnapped Amy, they couldn't get her off the ship. The ship staff refused, saying they couldn't hold up other passengers. At 7:50 a.m., a young woman made a simple, quiet announcement over the ship's intercom. Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk? In the meantime, Brad went up to the pool deck to sit and watch in case Amy walked by. Yellow, the bass player, approached him. Hey man, I'm sorry about your sister, he said. He asked what happened and then told Brad to wait while he got a friend to listen to Brad, who says that Yellow told him he was feeling guilty, remembers the experience as just odd. I don't remember hearing the guilty part that Yellow told him he was feeling guilty, but I do remember from everything else about Brad Bradley mentioning this particular scenario to him. Not the guilty part, but that Yellow told him he was sorry about his sister and found this whole experience kind of unsettling. After they got back to Richmond, the Bradleys found a post from another Rhapsody passenger on a cruise ship computer bulletin board warning female passengers to stay away from Yellow for unspecified reasons. I haven't seen this anywhere else. It was interesting to find it here. I know I don't want to present another video anytime soon on the Amy Bradley case, but I am probably going to see if I can find where that computer bulletin board female passenger warning is because I didn't see it on the amybradleysmissing.com website, and I want to see if I can find it somewhere else. Furthermore, Iva Bradley says two young female passengers, both college freshmen, claimed to have seen Amy and Yellow on the ship's glass elevator heading up to the disco at 5:30 a.m. Tuesday, the time of her disappearance. The teen said they saw Yellow leave the disco without Amy about 15 minutes later. Mentioned on America's Most Wanted, Yellow is the only person to be publicly named as a suspect. Mentioned on America's Most Wanted, Yellow is the only person to be publicly named a suspect. A Royal Caribbean spokesman says Yellow voluntarily submitted to a polygraph for the FBI and passed. Again, it came back inconclusive, not passed. Ship employees told the Bradleys to wait in their rooms for the chief security officer. He asked some questions and asked for a photo of Amy. He told them she was probably visiting in someone's room and would show up. I want to go back to Yellow for a second because another thing I heard on that podcast that I told you shared that wrong information. It also shared another wrong piece of information and said that Yellow had been fired from Royal Caribbean because of this case, because of fraternizing with the passenger, but that is not true. He remained with the liner for another 3 years or close to 3 years. So for a total of 5 years in all, or close to 5 years. Now, frantic with more than 7 hours having passed since Amy's disappearance, Ron and Iva demanded that Captain Yettle Gestad pass out and post Amy's picture and alert other passengers to her disappearance. He refused, saying he didn't want to upset the other passengers. Then the captain presented them with an option. If Amy wasn't on the ship, she was probably on shore in Curacao or in the water. If they stayed on the ship, they might lose a chance to search the island. Iva asked the captain if he was absolutely sure, if he thought beyond a shadow of a doubt that Amy was not on his ship. She says the captain said he was certain she wasn't aboard and that the best thing to do would be to leave the ship. Now, I don't know if when I start reading the next part of this article, it says that she had her ID on her driver's license, but in something I read today, something I either read or listened to, it did mention that at least for that part of information that she had the ID, and that was the first time I had ever heard that too. And in here, it doesn't seem to state it so far, but I just want to put it out there in case I forget. It was like we were in a slow motion house. Oh, going back to why I mentioned that is because the ID would give her ability to disembark from the ship, and then that would tell me that she was planning on leaving the ship. But I haven't, again, I saw that earlier on somewhere and I haven't seen it again since. She says the captain said he was certain she wasn't aboard and that the best thing to do would be to leave the ship. It was like we were in a slow motion house of terror, Iva recalls. Their world had completely collapsed and they were on the brink of emotional breakdowns while the rest of the passengers continued on smiling and laughing and partying in the Caribbean sun, oblivious to the family's plight. Royal Caribbean paid for motel rooms for the family, and Illinois Mutual CEO Mike McCord disembarked with his wife Kay to provide emotional support for the Bradleys. The multimillionaire fetched coffee and hugged family members. Okay, and now I'm going to be bringing you to part 3 of this 3-part news article from Style Weekly. And the article again is titled Amy Interrupted. The Bradleys checked into the Otra Banda, a rundown casino hotel on Curacao late Tuesday afternoon. From the room, they contacted the U.S. Embassy and family members whom they had been in touch with throughout the day, asking them to call authorities for help. Mary Christensen, Iva's younger sister, recalls that Iva could only muster a pained squeak on the phone. Ron had to take over. At 6:30 p.m., Ron, Iva, and Brad stood at the window of their hotel room overlooking the canal, watching Rhapsody of the Seas leave. They were close enough to throw a stone and hit it. Their stateroom was the only one that was dark. It was extremely difficult for us, Iva says, her voice breaking. That ship left as scheduled, on time, and there we stood watching. The family remembers it as the worst night of their lives. All three huddled together on their room's sole king-size bed, crying. Ron vomited blood. He was so upset. At 6 a.m. on Wednesday, 24 hours after Amy disappeared, authorities on Curacao began the first full day of sea and air searches for Amy. 3 helicopters, a British warship, a low-flying radar plane, and numerous cargo ships, tugboats, and fishing boats scoured the sea and coast for the next 2 days, finding no sign of her. Now, I've read that the search went from 2 days to 4 days, but I've also read a lot of information on finding bodies out in bodies of water or underwater body recovery mission. And let me tell you, a lot of the bodies, if the ones that the very few that do surface after they have died in water, it can take as long as 7 to 2 weeks. If they don't float up on top, or if they do and then find themselves floating back down pretty quickly, then they won't be found. However, if they do manage to start floating up because, the environments change within the waters, that that's when they float up, as long as they stay at the top, and that duration is indeterminate. It varies from body to body, from situation to situation, body of water to body of water. But that's the most likely they'll be found. And I'm mentioning this because everybody seems to think that it's just so simple to fall in the water and you'll be found, especially if the water is still or the weather is calm or you're closer to being docked or in port. That's simply not true because of things like riptides, temperature, whatever is underwater that could have snagged the body, because the body will sink before it floats up. So if it sinks and gets caught on something, that's more than enough for it to stay down there. And if it floats up, it may take it weeks to float up if it hasn't been swept out to sea by a tide by then. There's so many variables. With the help of Iva's brother John, who had contacted the FBI, and McCord, who chartered a plane, the Bradleys flew to St. Martin to intercept the Rhapsody of the Sea at its next port of call. At 7:30 a.m. on Thursday, before the first passengers left the Rhapsody, the Bradleys boarded a ferry and demanded a meeting with the captain. Upon the return to the Rhapsody, the Bradleys and McCord met in a conference room with the captain, the chief security officer, and other Royal Caribbean officials. As it turns out, the ship was in foreign waters and chartered in another nation, so the family had to ask permission for the FBI to be allowed to investigate. My personal feeling is they felt they'd never see us again, and we were the last people they wanted to see, Iva says. The cruise ship officers agreed to let 2 FBI agents casually dressed in jeans and golf shirts on board to investigate. And they're looking the agents first interview each of the Bradleys separately and ask what happened. And this is very typical and common doesn't have a chance investigations to be in the same room and give each other signals or talk over one another to keep a story going if indeed something they were involved in something nefarious because it usually is someone close to the person, family, lover, friendship, something like that. That it is always those intimate relationships that you find that person is the culprit, if that makes sense. The Bradleys were also polygraphed by the FBI upon returning home and were quickly eliminated as suspects, their lawyer says. More than 24 hours later, Royal Caribbean employees began distributing Amy's photo while still allowing passengers on and off the boat. The Bradleys asked that the guards be posted on the pool deck to look for her, but they allege it wasn't done. Without getting into specifics, Royal Caribbean says they acted appropriately. They also say they conducted another search with dogs a day later, a fact the Bradleys dispute, saying it was the FBI who brought in dogs. Either way, it also came up blank. Feeling helpless, the Bradleys exited the ship again Friday, March 27th in St. Thomas while the FBI investigated. McCord, the Illinois Mutual CEO, chartered a private Lear jet for the family to fly from St. Thomas back to Richmond. They left on March 28th, the same day that the Rhapsody of the Seas returned to the docks at San Juan, and the same day, unbeknownst to the Bradleys, that the witness claimed to see Amy there. It had been 4 days since her father saw her sitting in the lounge chair on the cabin balcony. None of us wanted to leave, Iva Bradley recalls, crying. That's one of the most single difficult things. I don't really have the words to describe what it was like to leave as I flew over the island and I didn't have Amy beside me. That is heartbreaking. Out of all of the sentences and statements from the family and that I've heard, read, that one breaks my heart. As a mother, that one breaks my heart. On the buffet, on the buffet in Mary Christensen's living room, besides a photo of Mary and Iva and their brothers and parents beaming happily while on a cruise on the Queen Elizabeth II in 1969, is a snapshot of Amy Bradley sitting on the sofa in her grandmother's house. On the end table in the photo is a community newspaper. Eerily, the headline on the paper reads, "Solve It." Every day we rack our brains. Where was she? Who did she talk to? I started asking questions from the minute she was missing, Christensen says. I pray for her. I pray for her every day. While she's talking in her Chesterfield County home, the phone rings. Christensen answers, but no one is on the line. She keeps the phone close by for the rest of the interview. When something like that happens, I still believe at any minute I can get a call from her, Christensen says in a far-off voice. Back at the house where the Bradley family has lived for the last 18 years, in a room decorated with sports trophies and family photos, is an enterprise that occupies the Bradleys 24 hours a day, the search for Amy. The first thing you learn when you spend any time with Iva Bradley is to use the present tense when talking about Amy. She is almost 25. She is coming home. Again, remember, this is a year later after Amy went missing. Though the Bradleys chose to close up Amy's apartment, they have kept her bedroom at home waiting for her. An electric candle has burned in a window of the house since they got back to Richmond. Amy's red Miata is parked in the driveway with a new license plate, WEM1SSU, and it looks like "We Miss You." On May 12, 1998, Amy's 24th birthday, her family and friends gathered at the Bradley's house for a party. The gifts are waiting in her room for her return. The cake is frozen. Amy's grandmother, Ruth Noblin, still brings her only granddaughter gifts when she goes on trips. On any given day, you can find a frisky white bulldog romping around their immaculately tended backyard, chomping on a deflated basketball. That's Bailey's, Amy's dog. Reminders are everywhere. Over the fireplace is a pencil sketch of Amy and her dad. She had it done by a local artist as a surprise for her dad just months before the cruise. On the pillars of the Bradleys' front porch are tied 5 fresh and vibrant yellow ribbons. More are wrapped around the trees in the front yard. In the beginning, yellow ribbons were tied on trees around the neighborhood in solidarity. Over the last 13 months, many have quietly disappeared. On the wall in the Bradley's command center is a framed poster that hung in the den of Amy's apartment before the family moved Amy's things back to the house a few months after her disappearance. A scene of a stream rushing through jagged rocks, it reads, perseverance in the confrontation between the stream and the rock, the stream always wins, not through strength, but through persistence. It could have been Iva's mantra. She wears a yellow ribbon and a tiny gold angel every day as a constant reminder of her mission. From sunup to late at night, she works the phones and replies to emails, following up leads and strategizing with the family's small inner circle of close friends and advisors. The ordeal has changed the Bradley family. Iva and Ron always look tired. Brad transferred from GMU to Virginia Commonwealth University and moved back home. Though Ron won the Illinois Mutual trip again this year, they didn't go. It's a trip to San Francisco. The company has sworn off cruises since Amy's disappearance. It was too soon, and they didn't want to see the same crowd they saw during the most horrible week of their lives. As the months go on, at the point when many parents might make their heartbreaking decision to grieve, the Bradleys won't give in. They note the whispers about a thriving white slavery trade in the Caribbean. They were just 30 miles from Venezuela when Amy disappeared, and South America has the highest rate of kidnapping and abductions in the world. Now, I did go back and do research on this, and there were, I don't want to say rumors, but for lack of a better word, please allow me to use that word with the understanding I mean no disrespect. Simply, the statistics at that time did not show that white slavery trade in the Caribbean to be a massive or like organized effort, nor does it show that nor does it show that South America had the highest rate of kidnappings. At the time that this was written, both of those statements were not factual. Some cruise industry critics raise questions about company hiring practices and safety of passengers. According to an MSNBC News report last year, crimes on the high seas don't have to be reported or documented since ships are often registered with foreign nations such as Liberia. That is scary to know, and I think that that probably is still the case now. I'm not sure, but I would suspect so because I don't know one cruise ship that is registered in the States because it's just so much cheaper to have them registered in other, third world country or nations that have lower tax rates for the cruise ships, and you're able to pay lower wages for non-American citizens. Yet crime does happen on board. In an August 1998 federal criminal trial, for example, a woman claimed she had been raped by a crew member while on another Royal Caribbean cruise. The defendant in the case was found not guilty, however, after being deported from Italy. The cruise industry maintains crime on their ships is far less than what it is on American soil. Royal Caribbean spokesman Rich Steck says he finds it rather hard to believe that Amy could be held against her will on a cruise ship for 4 days and be spirited off the ship while everyone was looking for her. His company believes there is a more down-to-earth explanation for Amy's disappearance. He says, adding that the cruise line regrets that the Bradleys are directing their grief at Royal Caribbean. Steck says his company can't comment on specifics of the lawsuit because it hasn't been served yet, a fact that the Bradley's lawyers dispute, but he offers the possibilities that Amy jumped or was pushed overboard. Now, this is that lawsuit that also had the grand jury where you heard all the testimonies from witnesses to that grand jury that are still, being shared with us up until this day, or at least bits and pieces. It's where the most recent one was shared by Brad Bradley, where Elizabeth, that was sitting in the Viking Lounge inside, allegedly saw Yellow with Amy, and that they walked behind the bar. And when they were walking behind there, quite possibly to be going to the elevator that goes to the cargo area, that another employee, a female employee, came running out saying Senorita is being kidnapped or something like that. That's where that allegedly took place, and that Elizabeth gave the testimony at this grand jury, in front of this grand jury. However, Elizabeth never made herself available to be met by the family or anyone else. So to this very day, it is unknown who this Elizabeth person really is. He says, this is Steck of Royal Caribbean. He says the FBI told Royal Caribbean that a table with Amy's footprints on it was found pushed against the railings with Amy's shoes atop it. He also says that Amy was heard to say to someone on board that a great way to get attention would be to jump overboard and swim to shore. Iva Bradley says Steck's statement about the table is a lie. The FBI has told her that Amy's footprints were never found on it, she says. Furthermore, the Bradley family all say the table was actually 3 feet from the railing. An FBI spokesman denied that any representative of the FBI would have told Royal Caribbean anything about evidence in the case, though they wouldn't confirm that Amy's footprints were not found on the table. Questioned later, Steck says he may have leapt to a conclusion. He maintains that the FBI told the cruise line a footprint was found on the table, but says he's not sure if it was Amy's. And again, I want to go back to the table. The table is like a big source of contention online. And let me tell you that the FBI, from what I found, is not confirming on the location of the table at all because it simply doesn't know for sure if the table was always pushed up against the railing or if when they were cleaning the room and the patio that the cleaning people pushed the table up next to the railing. So that cannot be confirmed. But there was a table on the patio. That can be confirmed. The Bradleys are adamant that Amy didn't jump. She wouldn't self-harm and she wasn't stupid, they say, and she was afraid of the ocean. As for any shoes being left in the room or on the balcony, Amy packed at least 10 pair, they say, and they're not sure which are missing. Again, I didn't know about the gene thing until this one. I didn't know about the camera until, not this, but the Amy Bradley's missing.com information. But having seen that these little details jump around, I'm not really sure what was fact and what is a misremembrance. So I don't I don't tend to believe that Amy self-harmed herself, but I do think that it was more likely that she fell into the water accidentally. And the camera for me would be a big indicator if they don't have that camera still and it was with Amy as well as the cigarette and the lighter. If she didn't go out of that room to take pictures and fall overboard, then she might have done it on the patio. She may have used the table to get a better view of pictures. I don't care how afraid she was of heights in the ocean. She always managed for different reasons to put herself in both places. The bungee jumping, being on the cruise that's high over water in the ocean, swimming with her family in the ocean, even though she was on her dad's back, she still went into the ocean and she was going to do jet skiing. So all these scenarios lead me to believe that for a perfect shot, the photographer she was, yeah, that she could have done that and not really understood that she could go over. Either way, however implausible you think that is, it is very possible. It is more likely she fell overboard by all statistics and probability than the fact that she would walk out of the room with over 2,400 people, that some of them would have been early risers, a lot of them actually. Somebody should have seen her, especially if she was wearing a camera around her neck and no shoes, short hair, an attractive girl. They said people were looking at her. So I find it hard to believe that at this point everybody decides not to look at her, especially without shoes and with a camera wrapped around her neck, being up early in the morning taking photos. Just seems like it would have made her very noticeable. So I don't think she left the room. There's just simply no evidence that she left the room. And for all the eyewitness sightings of Amy, the women never said that she didn't have shoes and they never said she had a camera. And I find this even more suspicious about accuracy because those are two big things that I think that you would want to mention if somebody was walking around barefoot or if she had a camera around her, even if she had a camera around her and had shoes, if she was as attractive as the statements the family is pushing, people noticed her, they they were drawn to her. It just seems like she would get that same kind of attention even at that time in the morning, especially with the type of early birds, the people getting ready for excursions, getting coffee. I just simply think that there would have been more traffic than people think there was because I've been on cruises. Human nature hasn't changed that much. And when I would wake up to go get coffee, it would be around 6 a.m. on the cruise because I'd go work out at 5. I'd go head out to get coffee and water, juice, whatever. And there would always be just more than enough people walking around to make it seem like it was a lively atmosphere. Okay, moving on. Hall, one of the family's lawyers, characterized some of the statements coming out of Royal Caribbean camp as nasty. The lawsuit alleges that Royal Caribbean employees and representatives defamed Ron and Brad Bradley by circulating rumors that they were involved in Amy's disappearance or murder. Once during an interview on MSNBC, the Bradleys and their lawyer angrily denied that Ron or Brad had anything to do with it and steadfastly claimed that Royal Caribbean acted negligently in court. Hall says they intend to produce evidence showing that a Royal Caribbean crew member was missing on another vessel months before Amy's disappearance, and the response was entirely different. All the stops were pulled out to find the missing woman, though she too hasn't been found, Hall says. Now that surprises me because the crew members usually are from third world countries and they're the ones that get the least protections. So this story really intrigues me and I really wish I could find more about it, but I haven't. As their search to find Amy and disprove Royal Caribbean's overboard theory goes on, however, evidence remains elusive. Royal Caribbean says none of its 40 video monitors that night were linked to videotape, and none of the guards recalls seeing Amy. There are electronic records of Amy using her key card to enter the room at 3:40 a.m. Tuesday, but her brother Brad says because the ship's lock-in system does not record when a passenger exits the room, there's no record of what time Amy left the room. Again, we've heard this in the Netflix documentary and subsequent stuff before and since then. She had her driver's license. So yes, it was in this article. She had her driver's license in her pocket and it could have been she had her driver's license in her pocket and it could have conceivably been used to clear her through U.S. Customs in San Juan, but the exit records at U.S. Customs for Rhapsody of the Seas passengers for March 28th are missing. I don't even understand how that happens. According to the Bradley's lawyer, who tried to get them through a Federal Freedom of Information Act request. So that would have been a year later or so that he would try to get. I didn't even know if they had the FOIA back then. I mean, I know that sounds dumb. I'm gonna have to look that up. Maybe it was a different, yeah, I think it must have been a more limited FOIA act than what we have now. Yeah, in fact, that's what I'm almost certain that's what it is. So what it's saying here is that she did have her driver's license in her pocket. Again, the first time I've read, seen, haven't even heard it come out of anybody's mouth that she had her driver's license in her pocket. And so if she did have her driver's license in her pocket, then you could believe that she was going to disembark and go take photos, but why she would go without her family, I don't know. Or maybe she simply put her driver's license in her pocket to be prepared. Or maybe she just put on jeans that had her driver's license, or maybe they're assuming she had her driver's license because they couldn't find it. Who knows? None of it deters the Bradleys. They cling to their belief that somebody saw Amy, wanted her, took her, and still has her. I feel Amy. I can't express it any other way. Sometimes I'm washed with her, Iva Bradley says. She is a very strong person. Anybody who plays athletics at the college level has a certain amount of determination and a stick-to-it-iveness. She would be capable of playing along until she could make a friend or make a break. She's not a little sissy or a wimp. But as the months go on, it requires a faith that would daunt even the most devoted parent. Anybody who has a child will understand, Iva continues, her voice resolute through tears streak her face. We will look for her until we find her. The last thing on our minds before we go to bed is, what are we going to do tomorrow? I know she's working to get home to us. We have a lot of faith in God, and we know God wants it to be four of us, not three of us.
So, what do I think now after all the information we have all gone through together? What do I believe happened to Amy Bradley? Well, I know most of us, including the family, will never know exactly what happened because I sadly really do believe that Amy Bradley is no longer with us. The most logical and probable possibility is that she fell overboard. Now, in this article that was written almost a year after Amy Bradley went missing from the cruise ship, some things that came out that I really had never seen before, and I still am not finding it anywhere, all in one spot, except for maybe some here and there in Reddit post. And Reddit is just simply a lot of very intuitive, very investigative people who put up very interesting comments and are really vetting and being very deliberate and discerning on the information they put out there more than any other site that seem to get very emotional reactions. But I think interested me most in this article, because it is an early report instead of the ones that we get now as memories start to get a little bit more foggier, hazier. There are many elements of the story that are very consistent that the Bradleys keep mentioning, and I appreciate that. However, there are from the earlier reports until now, and until confirmation as well from the FBI and Royal Caribbean records on timelines. For example, there was an article I found where Brad Bradley mentions his sister came in 20 minutes after him. And I would expect this. I would expect this kind of time fog to happen because when you're drinking, when you're tired, when you're on vacation, when there's really nothing for you to have a reason to keep up with the time and time passes for you, it could seem like 5 minutes is 20 minutes. And so I don't really find any of that suspicious. I do believe that Amy Bradley's dad did see her on the patio, but I don't believe with the way people's brains work that it could be certain that he could be or we could be certain that the time was set, especially after learning from this article that he had seen her come in, or sorry, that the kids had left the bathroom light on, it woke him up, and that he told them to turn it off, and that Amy came in to turn the light off, and then the cigarette, how the cigarette was lit is what he could see of her. One thing I would like to mention here is if that could happen then, was there any other point that she could have taken off the shirt as well as after came back in? Anything like that. There's movements where, he may not have heard because that was a big one to share with us. And if that will come up, why did her not leaving the room wake him up? Or just anything really. It's just intriguing how that he could remember will come up. But if Amy left the room, he didn't hear that. The sofa bed being down makes it even more interesting because now the room is even smaller. And I could see somebody bumping around, squeezing through, trying to find jeans to put on. It does, in this article, it does state that she changed into jeans. And to me, all that activity would be hard in a darker room that's a really tight fit as it is. And the camera. This is article, I mean, on the website where we hear that she had her camera on her. So if she had her camera, no shoes, because the article and the website mentioned she had no shoes, that doesn't mean she didn't have shoes because now around this time the family's saying, well, she took a lot of shoes. We don't know which ones were missing, but at this time it was believed that she had no shoes. At least that's what I'm inferring from everything I have seen around the earlier reports. And the new information is with the jeans and the camera and the ID being on her person. And of course, we know that the cigarette and the lighter were nowhere to be seen. So, for me, the most likely scenarios are this. Because Amy was so close to her family, she didn't bother to leave a note to tell them what she was going to do that morning. And even if she could have left a note, it just would have been too dark or it just would have been too much activity for that time in the morning. So I can see her not leaving a note. I also don't believe that she harmed herself. And so I don't think she would have not taken the time to write some kind of note because it seemed like that's how she expressed herself. Although most victims who harm themselves do not leave a note, believe it or not. I found that very fascinating by all the studies and statistics out there when it comes to people who self-harm themselves. But I do believe she would have written a note to her family to let them know where she went. And that's why I also believe that if she could talk to if she could talk to her brother Brad about what they would do the next day in Curacao, for example, jet skiing, then why wouldn't she remind him, oh, by the way, I'm going to wake up in the morning and either I'm going to go meet Yellow because he said he could, give me a good view so I can, take photographs from there, or that she just was simply going to go somewhere on the ship to take photos. Either way, nobody knew that she was going to do that. They thought she might have done that, and maybe she had mentioned it, but it was not confirmed. And it does seem like that would be something that she would confirm if anything, because if she had her ID on her just to let them know that she would be ready to, disembark with them, that just doesn't, that just does not seem like something that would have happened, that she just would have snuck out of the room with her ID camera, no shoes, maybe, potentially, uh, changed her jeans and had her cigarettes and lighter on her, not to prepare to go out for the rest of the day with her family, because that seems like a get up to be ready for the rest of the day. But it also seems like a perfect opportunity to go somewhere on the ship to take pictures and for that perfect shot to put yourself in a place. And the promenade would be one of the places where most people fall overboard. And that may have happened. However, I do think that that's not very likely because so many people, in my humble opinion, enough people would have been around on the cruise ship walking around that time of morning. There's the early risers on every cruise ship, and they're usually out and about walking, getting coffee, working out, just getting ready actually just for their whole excursions that they're about to have for that day, things like that. So, since it can't be confirmed she left the room, I still believe that even with all that stuff, that it was a perfect opportunity for her to go back out onto the patio. The door was open, and so therefore she either got sick or was trying to get a good shot. I don't know, but I do believe that that table has something to play a part because she had bungee jumped before, because she seemed to be considering jet skis, and her friends have said that she was somebody who lived life to the fullest and liked to live on the edge, her ex-girlfriend. That is why I believe that she would have done something like that. Or if she was very sick, which is what I initially thought, and now I'm not very married to, and would have thrown up to get on the table so to make sure that her vomit would clear everything, not get on the patio, not get on the patio wall, and not get just anywhere where somebody, it could be an inconvenience to somebody either below or within the room, meaning like other passengers on their patios or something like that, because it does seem to me that she was a very considerate person and she would have made that extra attempt to put herself in a position where even though she was scared of heights and even though she was scared of the ocean, the examples I brought up that show that she was, but she would do things to put herself in those situations. For example, just being on a cruise ship alone takes care of those two things. They were on, I believe, the 10th floor. I could be wrong, but it was a floor that was way up at the top, and it was going to be in a body of water that the largest one, the ocean. And so that is why I believe that she could have and most likely did that and fell over. And most people, when they fall over, are not seen. In fact, there was a story on a passenger who was missing from a cruise ship that somebody believes that the passenger, when they fell, they were turned around from the patio, looking into the room, and that the person brushed down them and that they may have slightly hit them. It was dark, and so they didn't really know what hit them. And now they're wondering if it was the person. That is the closest I've come to any story where there was some kind of physical interaction with somebody who had accidentally fallen from a ship. And so it's things like this. But whatever it is, whatever the exact scenario is, it falling off a cruise ship is still more likely than her being trafficked. And I'm not going to go into all of that reasoning other than to say to go back and look at my links to do your own independent research to see why that would not be likely, because it really is not likely in this situation. And I know just because it's not likely doesn't mean it didn't happen, but with all the years that have passed, the witnesses, the eyewitnesses whose stories couldn't be confirmed or corroborated, for all the leads that ended up being false and fake, for just everything that seems to be any kind of external piece of information, even suggesting that Amy Bradley is still alive or is being trafficked or was trafficked, none of that just seems to be panning out or a solid lead. But even if we go by the cruise director, as much as people don't like him, and I totally 100% get it, the cruise ship representative said that the FBI did tell them and stood by the story about the footprint on the table. And I believe that that could be definitely something that could have been there, even if a cleaning crew went in there and just didn't do a good job of cleaning the patio table, or it just simply wasn't something that they even cleaned the patio table, or if they did, they didn't do a great job. But I really, really wish they would tell us that they interviewed the cleaning crew who was with that room or in that room cleaning it to see if they remembered anything such a like a footprint being on the table. That would be interesting. However, that right there is enough for me to consider even more the story that she got up on the table to hike herself up more so that the vomit would clear and not be something that anybody would have to be a party to. And because of that, she found herself unbalanced, and she quite possibly could have already had her camera on. She could have already had her ID, her cigarettes and lighter with her and gone overboard. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to have some kind of possibility, because that is the most likely scenario. I believe it was like over 300 people go missing on cruise ships since like so many decades. And the biggest majority of those were those who had been heavily drinking and had fallen overboard and could never be found. It usually was that. Now, the more recent ones have to do more with drinking and selfies or just selfies. But of course, in Amy Bradley's time, there were no selfies. So I do think that that's why the sickness thing holds up more than any other thing. Why I simply don't think it was yellow is I do believe that the FBI, while not perfect, would have done a really good job of clearing him as they did the family. So I do believe that if the FBI believed that he wasn't a person of interest and moved on, then that is good enough for me for this case, because I know we have to go by agent, case by case. Not every agent is going to be as thorough and considerate as it seems like the people on this case were, or from what we have seen. And even though the FBI and Royal Caribbean don't seem to tick all the boxes that the families and that us as an audience would like to have had them, they did and are still continuing to give this case a lot of attention and have seemed to do quite a bit of work on it. So I do think that with that kind of force backing up the search, the investigation into mm, Amy Bradley missing from that cruise ship, that it does seem like something more solid may have come up because as smart as traffickers can be, at some point, someone in that organization would slip with this high profile of a person, which Amy Bradley has become, whether it is to get the award, whether it is to get the reward money, or something dumb they've done to get them into a sticky situation where they could use this as leverage. Something to me would have been done like that, or something similar. I don't know, but that whole trafficking thing, that whole trying to get a body off a cruise ship, those eyewitness accounts, they just seem very bizarre. And if anything, just stories because they're not very reliable, unreliable stories that are meant to be helpful, but actually thwart the investigation and sidetrack it. So, to me, the most plausible explanation, even though there is some interesting information from then and even now, some things that we didn't know, some things we do know now, some things that we knew then but have forgotten, all of that information points to fuzzy memories, unreliable testimony and timelines, and everything fits into the scenario of family and friends who strongly want an outcome because hope does that to them as it would quite possibly to all of us. We don't know how we would react until we're in that situation, but I can tell you right now, I would 100% keep advocating for finding my missing daughter or son if I couldn't, have it in front of me that they had 100% passed. So there you have it. That's going to end my Amy Bradley discussions for a while, at least, on my YouTube channel. I am going to be picking up a missing persons case from my hometown, Wichita Falls. And while it is one of those that I think gets a lot of attention, I would like to present it from a hometown girl's point of view and bring you into my hometown and how, of course, in smaller towns that information gets passed around, what I know of the law enforcement process there and why that makes a difference now. And how this story is still so compelling that not only can you find it everywhere, but that it was just recently featured in News Nation. So join me next week when I present to you my hometown missing person story of the mysterious disappearance of Keith Mann. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and God bless you. See you later. Bye.